What's up, beautiful people, and welcome to another morning session with the Mass Poet. Today, we're talking about how to write poetry for beginners. So if you're just starting out, you haven't even put the pen to pad yet, or if you have put your pen to pad, but you just don't know quite where to start or how to do this, today I'm gonna give you a little step-by-step guide, just 5 ways to get started on writing poetry. Whether that be love poems, poems about social justice, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to write about, today is the day. I'm going to give you 5 steps for a beginner on how to get started. Let's go. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell so you never miss out on a morning session with the Mass Poet. So the first thing you want to do when it comes to writing poetry is actually read poetry. It doesn't have to be, your regular poetry. It doesn't have to be an Emily Dickinson or William Shakespeare. But if you like that, read that. Me, myself, I love hip hop music. So I'll go read through the lyrics of hip hop. That is poetry in itself. I'll also read poetry from Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou. So I read stuff like that also, but primarily my poetry comes from reading hip hop music. What you can do is go through, read it. Again, you can do William Shakespeare, whatever you choose. Read that poetry yourself and kind of dissect it, analyze it, kind of understand the meaning behind it, or come up with your own meaning behind those words, because poetry is like an abstract painting. You can look at that poetry and you may get a different understanding from those words, or you may receive those words differently from somebody else reading it, or even the person who wrote it. So look at those words, analyze them, dissect them, and come up with your own meaning behind each line. So again, you can take the lyrics from songs, or you can go through and read books of poetry to help you out better in understanding how to write it. Number 2, guys, is go listen to poetry. Listen to people who do spoken word, people who actually read their poems in person. If you can't go to anywhere like a club or a poetry club or anything like that, then go on YouTube, type in poets, type in poetry club on YouTube, and a whole bunch of poets will pop up on there. That way you can get a better understanding of how they read the poetry, how they get the feeling behind it, the emotions behind it, and you can use that for your own poetry or when you go to speak your poetry. And people can resonate more with your poetry when they know the emotion behind it. So again, listen to poetry and that'll help you out so much in writing and reciting. All right. Now the third thing you want to do as a beginner is just start with writing small poems. You don't have to write a whole page. You don't have to do that at the beginning, but if you do have that, go for it. But if you don't, if you feel like you just got a few words right now, go with that. Sometimes fewer words speak more than a lot of words. Again, it's always quality over quantity. It's not about writing a whole bunch of words and then you go on a rant and then you lose sight of the subject matter or the topic that you want to get across in your poem. So you start with a haiku. A haiku is a 3-line poem. This started way back in Japan. We'll talk about that in another video though, but haikus, that's a small poem. You can even do 6-liners, 9-liners, whatever you want to do to start out, that's what you do. Start small and then build from there. The 4th thing you want to do is not obsess over that first line. Whatever comes to your mind, go ahead and write it. It doesn't matter, just write whatever comes to your mind, write it down. It may not work for you in the long run, but just write it down. Again, it's an idea. You may come back to it 3 weeks, 4 weeks later. That's fine. You may come up with something then. But just keep, if something comes in your head, comes in your mind, just write it down. Don't obsess over it. If you can't come up with a full 6-liner or 9-liner at the beginning, and all you have is 1 line or 2 lines to start off with, take a little breather, take a little break, take about 2 hours, 3 hours, or again, it may take a week, maybe a few days, and then come back to it, and you may have something for it, because sometimes we have to live life, we have to see things, we can also speak through other people's stories, that's another way, but again, do not obsess over that first line, just write whatever comes to your mind. Alright, and then the 5th and final suggestion I have as a beginner with poetry, learn rhyme schemes. Now let me say this, poems do not have to rhyme, but what the rhyming does, it helps you memorize it better, and it also helps the reader memorize your poetry better, and it just resonates with them a little bit more when you have a nice rhyme scheme. But again, A poem does not necessarily have to rhyme line for line. Just go through, write a short story first about how you feel or what you saw for that day. Write that story, and then you can come back later and come up with a rhyme scheme for that story. Or again, keep the rhyme scheme out completely and just stick with that story, and that right there is your poem. All right, poets and poets, that right there are my 5 tips for beginners. If you're just starting out in writing poetry, those are 5 tips you can use to get started as a beginner. If you have any questions about poetry, please leave it in the comments below. And if you already started writing poetry, let me know in the comments below. What type of poetry are you writing? Are you writing more love poetry, things about social justice, things about things that are going on in the world? Are you writing about war? Are you writing about bringing people together, equality? What are some of the things, subject matters that you're touching on right now if you're already starting to write poetry? Thank you guys so much for joining me, the Masked Poet, for another morning session. Y'all be blessed and peace.